Hi, I'm Robert Hatta, and I'm one of the talent partners here at Drive Capital. And my job is to help our young, very small companies become bigger ones by attracting, aligning, and motivating amazing people. I've been doing this for 8 years now, and I have never seen a market as crazy competitive as the one we're in today. All the money, all the venture capital, all the big tech giants flooding the market right now, trying to recruit the same people you are. And this masterclass is meant to help you and your team become great interviewers so that you can compete with those tech giants and build your company into the biggest, most successful company it can be. A lot of people aren't very good at interviewing. In fact, some people are terrified of it. So they lean on tricks, hacks, and other shortcuts I like to call silver bullet interviewing. Things like how many marbles fit inside the Empire State Building, or some killer question that tells you everything you need to know about a candidate, or snap judgments based on a candidate's clothes, hair, appearance, body language.
You guys seem like cool guys. You got hair similar to mine.
And just as bad is leaning on big, known, prestigious brands that are either on their resume or not. The truth is, these tactics, these hacks, these shortcuts tell you nothing about the candidate and in fact open you up to risk of false positives, assuming a candidate is great because they passed your one little silver bullet test, but not really using that time to get to understand and know the candidate. Another common pitfall is to wing it. That is to say, to not have a process at all.
We'll do it live!
We've all been part of that interview where you sit down and the person on the other side of the table says, "So, tell me about yourself." Or that person talks more than asks questions and listening. Or evaluating a person based on some gut feel or vague criteria. These approaches have two direct outcomes, both of which negatively affect your company. The first is hiring mistakes. A broken structure or poor interviewing processes will lead to more hiring mistakes. A big company can get away with it. They can make a hiring mistake, or even hundreds, and still be there the following day. But one hiring mistake could kill your startup. Second, a broken interview process scares away the good people, the ones you want. They look at that broken process as a proxy for what it's like to work at your company. Bad interviewers, bad scheduling, a broken experience, all of that leads to them walking out the door. I want to ground this conversation in one simple truth. An interview is just a conversation, but it's a conversation with a purpose. And that purpose is to understand the candidate and determine their fit to your company and to the role you're hiring for. The start of any interview process is to prepare by knowing what you're looking for. I know that might sound simple, but it's the most important part of the process. And that starts with, what is this role? A lot of people call that a job description. And a lot of people think a job description is a document that you type out and post on a job board somewhere. And there it goes, and it's out into the world, and that's all it is. The truth is, this is an exercise in aligning with your hiring managers and other stakeholders in this role around what is the job and what are we looking for in a person who will be successful in that job. Not only writing it down, but aligning. There's going to be a lot of trade-offs. Not every candidate is going to have every little aspect of the qualities you're looking for. You need to make trade-offs about what the candidate must have versus what is a nice-to-have quality in the candidate. Important also in defining the role is to define and articulate the cultural aspects of every candidate you're going to evaluate. Now, a lot of companies will lean on culture fit as a major hiring criteria for roles. The problem is, a lot of companies cannot consistently articulate what that culture is, and also many of their interviewers are not effective at evaluating whether or not those cultural aspects are there or not. And when that's the case, I advise our companies to throw out culture fit altogether. When you don't have an articulated, aligned, and consistent definition of what your culture is, and your interviewers are not effective at screening for those values, you're going to do more harm to your company than good by using culture as a hiring criteria. Ambiguous definitions of culture boil down to, does this person look like, sound like, or come from a similar background to me? And that's where you get into trouble using cultural fit as a hiring criteria.
I'm just looking to hire guys that I don't mind hanging out with for like 12 hours a day.
If you have invested in defining what your culture is, aligning your organization in a shared understanding of what that means, and trained folks on how to interview for those things, then yes, make it part of your hiring criteria. Make it a powerful part of your hiring criteria. But only if you've done those things and have invested that time. General characteristic to include in all of your job descriptions, to me, for startups, is adaptability. The truth is, when you hire someone for a role in a startup and that startup is growing and succeeding, that role is guaranteed to change in 60 days, 90 days, 100 days. What you hire someone for today is not what they're doing in a month. So you need to hire for people who can adapt, learn quickly, aren't afraid of change. In fact, embrace that change. Come in knowing that things are going to move around very quickly all the time. And that's an identifiable trait you need to look for and require in all of your positions, no matter the function, no matter the seniority at a startup. The last general thing to consider when you're drawing up your job description is to understand where market compensation is. And that's not to say you have to compete with the Googles and Facebooks and Amazons of the world, but you do need to know what they're offering and paying their people, as well as other startups nationally and in your direct market. That's so that you can understand what it is in the market you're able to attract. Money matters, but it's not the only thing. Startups win all the time against bigger companies by offering autonomy, speed, impact, the ability to direct a career as well as a company towards growth and success. But you do need to know what someone is giving up or trading off from a compensation basis and making sure you're accommodating that in other ways. Understanding market compensation data also has the benefit of understanding in your stack whether you're hiring more junior people or senior people or specific skill sets in the market that are hard to find and what you're going to have to pay for that in your budget. All of this boils down to an articulated job description where you also start to layer in the very specific technical requirements of the jobs. And I like to break those down into two sections. The first being, what are the direct accountabilities of the job? What is this person, what is this role responsible for? Write it down. Write it down not as a pretty thing you might put on your website or jobs page, but how you would explain it to the person as they're starting their job on their first day. The second is outcomes. Now, these are specific things the person in this role is required and responsible to deliver. Is that a sales goal? Is that a product goal? Is that a technology goal? Whatever it is, write it down and align on it with the rest of the stakeholders for the position. Together, these general characteristics, culture fit, adaptability, and the specifics of the technical role and its requirements come together in a job description and then are further distilled into a scorecard. Now, a scorecard is really just a light version of the job description, but one that every interviewer can take with them into the interview or study before, knowing these are the things I'm looking for in this position and sticking to the script throughout their questioning so that they can assess the skills and the categories and criteria you've all defined and aligned on before the process began. Nothing's worse and nothing adds more risk to an effective interview process than getting into it and having the definition of what you're looking for move around. Agree on it, articulate on it, trade off, argue, fight, whatever, but come out with a shared, aligned requirement of what you're looking for so that when you're out there talking to candidates, you're all singing from the same job description. Now, that might sound like a lot of work. There's actually quite a few easy, lightweight, and relatively inexpensive tools out there to help workflow this, automate this, and record a lot of the aspects that go into building a job description, as well as syndicating it onto different job boards. Those are called applicant tracking systems, or ATS. But also, spreadsheets, if you're small, are just as good for documenting these things and running an effective process. Now that we've decided and aligned on what we're looking for, now we need to decide and align on the process. Now, that's different for different kinds of roles. The process and the people involved in that process for a technical role are going to be very different from a sales role, for example. So think about and align on, at the beginning, what is going to be the sequence of steps from interview screen to in-depth career path interview to maybe a presentation based on what they've learned from the company, or where in the process do we put a technical screen? Do we use outsourced technical screens or we do those in person? These are all questions to ask and answer before the interview process starts. Within that is, who's got the final say? Go into it understanding these are the people who have input on this decision, but this is the one person who has the final decision. Don't let that develop organically or be different from one candidate or one role to the next. Define that up front so that the process is set and smooth as you start to engage candidates. Also to be defined, today at least, are little simple logistical questions. Are we doing Zoom interviews? Are we meeting in a coffee shop? Are they at the office? These are all things that are important to define up front, not simply for logistics and planning and purposes like that, but also for consistency. You want to be able to have the same experience and therefore the same information from one candidate to the next. When you change up the environment, or worse, change up the people involved, it's as bad as changing the criteria and will lead to an inconsistent and ineffective decision process where you're going to make more hiring mistakes. Another key part of the process is to dedicate the time. I know that sounds simple, but my clients and my partners are startups, and nobody's sitting around with abundant time. Good interviewing takes time and is part of your job and all others who are working on filling this position. So they need to go into their day with time budgeted for interviews, meeting candidates, and providing speedy feedback on those candidates. You should also, within each interview, define what are we going to talk about? How are we going to structure this interview? Are we allotting enough time on the front and back end to answer questions, to make the candidate feel welcome and comfortable? Even things like asking if they know where the bathrooms are or do they need a drink throughout or at the beginning or end of a process as you're handing them off to the next person. These are all great ways to ground the candidate in a comfortable environment, and comfortable environments are the ones in which they're most likely to be honest, truthful, and comfortable themselves. Finally, get that feedback fast. Bake that into your structured process. To get to the end of these interviews and not collect speedy, thorough feedback is wasting all of that. So remember, bake into each interview time with the interviewers afterwards to get their feedback. Again, this is something an ATS system can help with because it allows that interviewer to run back to their desk, jot down their notes, score the candidate, and move on with the rest of their day, but get that feedback while it's still fresh. Waiting a weekend or even a day can dramatically alter that feedback. Now let's start interviewing. Again, an interview is a conversation with a purpose, and that purpose is to understand. And behavioral interviewing is the gold standard of understanding a candidate, not for what they say they can do, but for what they've already done. The principle behind behavioral interviewing is that past performance is the best predictor of future performance. But what that means is, as an interviewer, you have to immerse yourself in the experience of the candidate by asking probing, multi-layered, contextually rich questions. There are several ways to go about doing this. The first is what I like to call a chronological career journey interview. This is easy for most people to do because it's the type of interview that most feels like a conversation. You're asking someone to explain where they've come from and walk forward from there to the present, pausing at each point to talk about the jobs they did, the challenges they came across, the people they collaborated with, the outcomes they drove, and all of the things that go into making decisions throughout those experiences. It feels a lot like a tell me about yourself conversation, but with much more structure and with much more pointed, specific questions throughout. An example is not to simply ask someone how or why they chose their major at college, but to dissect the process that it went into that decision. This will enlighten you to how that candidate, at probably one of the earliest points of their career, collects data, formulates decision, takes influence, and moves forward to the next step. That might not be directly relevant to the role you're hiring for, but is an example of turning what is simply a one answer or yes no question into a more contextually relevant and rich conversation that helps you understand who this person is, how they make decisions, and whether or not they've grown as they've moved forward in their career and towards what consistent patterns of behavior and choices. Another way to do behavioral interviews is to create situations, and not hypotheticals, what would you do if sort of situations, but more of the tell me about a time when situations. Go back in time across whatever time frame you want and pluck out a situation that is like this. That could be like this job, that could be like this company, that could be like a responsibility, say like management, whatever it is. ask that candidate to provide you a specific example of when they've done something that's relevant and related to the role. Now, that's just the start. The behavioral interview is to dive into that situation with the goal of coming out feeling like you were there, like you were present to this action, outcome, or decision. And you do that by asking lots and lots of questions. Why'd you do that? How did that work out? Were there other choices involved? Who was involved? And after you hear their name, write it down ostensibly. That does two things. One is the candidate knows you're listening and you're writing it down. And from this point forward, I'd better be very specific when I answer your questions. The second is, when you write it down, that says to me as a candidate, you might call that person later and try to corroborate the version of truth I'm telling you today. Again, making this person understand these are details that are important, and they're details that will be remembered, and they're details that might have to be validated later by a third party. Throughout and at the end of a good behavioral interview, you should come away with an understanding of not only this person, and not only specific examples relevant to the role, but also patterns. Patterns of events, patterns of choices, patterns of behaviors that start to define who this person is, what they're good at, what they enjoy, and the type of environments in which they'll thrive or struggle. And your job as an interviewer is to start to string together those patterns and use those patterns as the basis of determining whether or not they fit your company and your role. The job is to connect those dots of experience, connect those dots of examples, specific examples, toward whether or not they fit with your role. Is this person trending toward a set of outcomes and responsibilities that this role requires in their career, or are they going in a different direction? Or has their background come close but never really accomplished the things that are required in this role? These are the things you're looking for as you evaluate whether they're a fit or not. Now, all of that might sound easy for me to explain it, but the truth is, it's hard. In some cases, you're asking very deeply probing questions that might make you or the candidate feel uncomfortable. It takes practice, but there are a few techniques you can use to help smooth out that uncomfortable sense that I'm asking tough questions unnecessarily. One is to just reflexively say why. Whenever you get an answer, it's important to understand the why behind that answer, what led up to that choice. And just instinctively saying why can be a good trick to make sure that your questions and your conversations continually build contextual richness as you move on to the next example. Another technique is to play back. Literally repeat what you're hearing. What that says to the candidate is, I hear you, I understand you, I'm with you on this journey. That provides comfort. And with comfort, you can start to ask the tougher, more probing questions. And finally, the masterclass is, I'm seeing a pattern. Can I show it to you and see if it resonates or if I'm reflecting this in an appropriate, accurate way? What that means is, I'm starting to see choices or behaviors that repeat themselves, good or bad, aligned with the role or not. But I want to get your take on it. Am I getting this? Am I seeing this correctly? Now that has a great impact because one, if you're right, if you're getting that candidate and you're seeing that pattern and playing it back to them accurately, that's deeply endearing, builds trust, builds empathy, and allows you to go, again, into much more deeper, in some cases challenging questions that reveal great information on this candidate. But even if you're wrong or they see things differently, you've asked them permission to correct that assessment. And in doing so, they now feel like not only are you actively listening, but you asked permission to compare notes with them. Either way, you come away with a deeper level of trust and comfort with that candidate that, again, allows you to ask what are oftentimes more deep or challenging questions in an interview. And the key thing with behavioral interviews is to understand a situation as if you were there yourself. I want to have a brief word on tech screens. Now, tech screens are part of the interview process, typically for technical roles, where you're trying to assess the technical skill and experience of the candidate. An engineer might sit down, cross their arms, look at the candidate, slide a whiteboard marker over to them and say, get on the board and show me how smart you are. And my default expectation is you're not. Not everybody does that, But at some level or another, technical screens in many cases are viewed as hostile engagements, trying to interrogate even the candidate and just see how they'll hold up under pressure. The truth that approach misses is that these are peer interviews. That candidate is interviewing you as well. How smart are you? How thoughtful are your questions? Is this even relevant? What are you going to be like to work with? Are all questions in their mind that this interview is meant to answer. And if you're doing this, that's not sending the right impression. Make it a two-way experience. Make it a two-way conversation. That could include working on a project together to see what that person is like in a collaborative environment, which is what it's most likely to be like in your company anyway. So please do not take technical screens as a hostile interrogation style environment. See them as peer interviews, treat them as such, and make them effective proxies to how work gets done in your company anyway. Now the fun part, non-discriminatory questions and the sort of things you just can't ask in an interview process. Now, the list is long, but the reasons are simple, and I found that adhering to 3 simple rules will keep anybody out of trouble. The first is to think about every question you ask in the terms of, does this question lead to information that is directly relevant to the role we're hiring for? If the answer is no, don't ask it. Second, ask yourself and make sure that you've described up front in the job description or maybe in the interview before you start asking questions, the specific requirements of the job. Do you have to lift heavy things? Is there a lot of travel involved? These things should be explained and listed up front so that they're not surprises and not necessarily baked into the questions of the interview. And finally, don't ask questions of one candidate you wouldn't ask of every candidate in the process. That guy with the neck tattoo, don't ask him if he's been to prison if you're not going to ask everybody if they've been to prison. Now the thing about references, most companies treat this as a technicality. A box to check at the end of the process. You call some names, they provided those names, they're probably going to say positive things, and I just need to get through this to make it feel like this was a thorough process. The truth is, references are an extension of the interview process. Go back to that point I made earlier where you're writing down specific details, writing down names of people involved in those elements of the candidate's past. You might be talking to that person, or you might be talking to someone who was in that room. Remember, you wanted to feel like you were in the room too through your probing behavioral questions. Now you're talking to someone who was in that room. Compare notes. Here's what that person said and described for this project or this instance or this outcome in their career. You were there. Does that line up with your understanding? Even for positive references, if you're talking to someone who used to work with or whom the candidate worked for in a previous job, those are opportunities to learn and get better as a hiring manager. What's it like to manage this person? What motivates them? What are things I should or shouldn't do to get the best performance out of that candidate when they work for me? These are all learning opportunities that are critical and not simply technicalities of a process. I like to tell our companies, references are a great way to recruit. You love this candidate. They've done amazing things. They're a great fit for your role. I'm guessing people they worked with that are calling as their references are similarly talented and might be interested in joining your company too. Flip those references when appropriate to a "so tell me about yourself" conversation with the person on the other side, and you can find that hiring one person turns into hiring 2, 3, or 4 from that same company or from that person's network before they've even started. So remember, references are hugely valuable. Don't simply skip past them as some box to check. Now throughout, once you turn on an interview process, you've got to maintain momentum, speed. You can't go silent for a week after an interview and not give feedback to that candidate or tell them what's happening next. The world is too competitive, especially today, for that type of attitude. Move forward with purpose. Make decisions, communicate frequently, keep the momentum going. Even if the momentum is, we don't have a spot for you, or you're not a fit, or we like a candidate better, get that decision made quickly, communicate it to the candidate, and move on quickly. Time, or a lack of speed, kills all deals, and hiring and recruiting and interviewing are no different. Also, remember throughout, am I selling or am I buying? Buying is, I'm still trying to evaluate whether or not this person's a fit. Selling is, I think they are, or I want to know more about this candidate before we make this decision, you therefore have to lean into that candidate, let them know they're wanted, show them the things about your company that should get them excited. Even though you haven't quite made your decision yet, or the process isn't quite complete, don't wait until the end to start selling your candidate. Recognize moments throughout the process where you have to lean in and let them know you're excited. You're grateful that they're part of this process, and you can't wait to move to the next step. All right, all this work, and you're finally at the offer process, and this is a part of the process, unfortunately, where so many companies get it wrong. I like to start with the cardinal rule of you never make an offer that you don't know with certainty will be accepted. Now, that's a hard thing to hear for a lot of people, and some people interpreted that as you have to give this person everything they want. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, throughout the interview process, you've had the conversations necessary to understand what motivates this person, to understand what they need to join your company, to join your mission. Is it a bigger role with more responsibility? Is it the speed and autonomy that comes with joining a younger, faster, smaller company? Is it cash? Is it equity? Whatever it is, you know those things and you're prepared to offer them. If you don't know those things, don't make the offer until you do. Or if you do know those things and you just can't provide them, don't make the offer. Don't waste their time. Don't waste yours. Another rule of thumb is that you, the hiring manager, should be having those conversations and making that offer. Nobody else. If that person's going to work for you, then you should be the one telling them just how excited you are to have them join the company. Here are the things we're giving you. These are the things we're going to do together, and those things are going to be great. How is that same message going to be delivered as well by a third-party recruiter or a headhunter or someone who works in HR 3 rows down? It's got to be you. Not to mention, your incentives are not exactly aligned with a third-party recruiter. Their goal is to get the fee, which means close fast and preferably at the highest possible salary level. For you, that might not be necessary. And close fast is not the same thing as get the right person. So, you do the conversations, you do the negotiations, you do the offer delivery, and you do the close. And if you're not comfortable doing that, get comfortable doing that. All right, everything's great. They accepted your offer. There are still a few more things you need to account for. Most notably is you need to have the conversation of what the candidate's going to do when their current employer invariably counteroffers them in response to their attempt to quit. This will happen. And you have to tell that candidate it will happen. And then you have to work with the candidate to prepare them to have that conversation. And I mean that in a literal sense. Role play it. We're so excited you're joining. This is going to be awesome. Thank you so much. Have you thought about what you're going to say to your boss when they offer you more money or more responsibility or more whatever to reconsider and stay? And if you have thought about it, let's talk about the words you're going to say in response. Literally, I'll be your boss. You be you. You resign. I try to counter you, and you tell me what you're going to say in response. They should go into that conversation prepared and having already had that conversation in their head. Being caught off guard is the worst thing in the world for you and them, and will lead them to being susceptible to a counteroffer and you losing a great candidate you've worked so hard to find and hire all the way up to this point. Additionally, remind the candidate of why you even started this process to begin with. You went through an interview process, you gave an offer to them, they accepted. They need to look back at their former employer and say, I'm leaving you because you either underappreciated me or underpaid me or didn't give me enough responsibility. Whatever the reasons are, put those ideas back in their head so that they go into that conversation steeled to resign, quit, move on, and join your company with excitement. One last very important step. In today's market, and I've seen this a bunch of times, it's not enough to get an offer in front of a candidate, have them accept it, go to their current employer, and quit. There's still time and therefore risk between those moments and when they start working for your company. And I encourage our companies to fill those moments with engagement and opportunity. It could be things like send them documentation on your tech stack. It could be inviting them to a happy hour or a critical meeting or an all hands that you're having, even if it's before their start date. Whatever you're doing, make sure they feel as if they already work there. Because there are recruiters, there are tech companies, there are other employers coming after those people, even though they've quit their old job and accepted yours, that still might get in the way of that person starting one day. So treat that moment as if they already work there and make them feel that way. Send them a swag box. Have your other employees send them texts. I'm so excited that you're going to join this team. Can't wait to spend time with you. Whatever it is, make them feel like they're already there so that they feel committed to the company when other people come calling. All right, that's it. I could go on for days about interviewing, but what's important to remember is through these simple concepts, you can make your company better than 99% of other companies out there when it comes to interviewing. And through that, eliminate hiring mistakes, attract even better people, and grow your company into the fully successful company it's meant to be.